I'm Amanda, 38, a woman who once managed seven-figure portfolios before I traded suits for the quiet chaos of home life. Saying that out loud now feels like pulling a thread from an old sweater and watching the whole sleeve unravel. I mention my age and my past because it matters. I didn't stumble into this. I walked into a life I thought I chose, and somewhere along the way, someone rewrote the terms without asking me. I won't dress it up. I was a wife who loved, who softened her edges for a marriage, and I was also a professional who understood numbers, contracts, and the way small dishonesties compound into ruin. The night Andrew left me at a rest stop 37 miles from home, it began as an anniversary we were supposed to remember for the right reasons. 17 months of small shifts had taught me to look for patterns, receipts that didn't belong, a cologne I didn't recognize, late nights that smelled of someone else. I'd found a crumpled receipt months earlier, black tea, white print, 6 years of disappointment. It should have been a joke someone played on someone else. It wasn't. The joke was on me. But that receipt was only a footnote. The real story was in the quiet way money slipped sideways and the burner phone shoved into a drawer in the tiny earring Nan left on our bed that matched the pair I hadn't seen in Andrew's drawer. I remember the drive to Morton's that evening, his hand warm on my lower back, the low hum of the city around us. He toasted to us, to surprise and love, and I believed him because I wanted to. It didn't take long for the evening to tilt. A single question I asked at dinner about a $10,000 transfer that had appeared in our joint account was enough to tip him from patron to predator. "You went behind my back," he said, voice flat and controlled. I asked for transparency. He taught me a lesson. When he told me to get out and walk to learn some respect, he thought he was doing a simple thing, humiliating a woman who would apologize in return. Simple scripts are the tools of cowards. He had calculated the worst of it, a remote rest stop, a storm on the way, the distance too far for convenience. He had not calculated that the woman he thought fragile could read ledgers, could map his lies, could plan. I stood there in the car park while his taillights faded, and for the first time in a long time, I was entirely calm. Calm wasn't surrender. Calm was inventory. I had been preparing for this moment quietly, and for months. I had gathered receipts like breadcrumbs, recorded conversations like confessionals, and built a team in the shadows. Marcus, my brother, who would not flinch. Valentina, a forensic accountant, who smelled fraud like rain smells ozone. Rebecca, the divorce attorney who could move a mountain with a single motion. What looked like a twig of courage to him was in reality the last plank of a bridge I'd spent 8 months building. With my phone pressed against my palm, I hit record. I wanted the proof to be iron, not rumor. His voice, cold and clipped, told me to walk. I told him I would. He drove away, expecting me to be reduced to sobs and pleas. What he didn't know, what he never expected, was that Marcus was waiting in the shadows, a black truck parked behind the abandoned gas station, umbrella and thermos in hand. He always hated theatrics, but he loved justice more. I had rehearsed this, the long stare, the slow closing of the car door, the 1-minute countdown, until his taillights vanished. I walked toward the gas station as rain threatened to begin, feeling both ridiculous and powerful. Standing in the shadow of that crumbling building felt like stepping into a story that had been written out of order. The villain thought he had the script, I had the pen. Marcus stepped out, listened to the recording, then handed me a cup of coffee as the first drop started. "This is criminal abandonment," he said. Those words warmed me more than the coffee. He'd been my protector before. That night he became the messenger of consequence. We slipped into the truck and drove through sheets of rain, not like fugitives but like people who had already survived worse and now simply refused to be small. Everything we did from that point was deliberate. The hotel was booked under my maiden name. The clothes were chosen to look like a frightened woman who'd been out in a storm. The emergency credit card Marcus had set up months earlier was waiting. Valentina's spreadsheet sat on a laptop, glowing like evidence under a microscope. I remember the weird sweetness of being allowed to be both the frightened woman and the architect of his downfall at once. It was a currency I hadn't known I had. There's a particular kind of quiet that comes when you know you have more than a story, you have proof. The recordings, the bank statements showing months of transfers to accounts. Andrew thought I couldn't find the burner phone messages between him and Nayan. They all stacked up into something heavier than shame. This wasn't about revenge as a spectacle. It was about accountability. He had chosen to teach a lesson by abandoning me in a storm. I chose to teach him what consequence looks like when it is measured, legal, and inevitable. By the time the hotel clerk wrapped a towel around my shaking shoulders, I felt the fatigue of someone who had been carrying a century of hurts and finally set half of them down. I gave the clerk a name paid with unfamiliar cash and let the tear in my voice be convincing. This was theater of a kind, yes, but its purpose was protection. In the hotel room, I played back the recording and listened to Andrew's voice admitting plainly what he'd done. I listened until the words stopped punching and began to form the scaffolding of everything that would come next. I want you to know that the storm that Andrew expected to break me became the weather map of his ruin. It started with a darkening sky and a taillight disappearing around a bend, but it didn't end there. The rest was procedural phone calls, freezes on accounts, a judge who didn't tolerate cruelty masquerading as discipline. The way I tell it now is not triumphal, it's factual, because the facts are what saved me. Marcus's truck smelled like wet leather and coffee, and I clung to both as if they were lifelines. We didn't drive straight home. We drove to the small suite Marcus had booked in my maiden name, and there, with rain thrumming against the panes like an impatient audience, we began to assemble the case that would make my leaving him look less like drama and more like necessity. Valentina's spreadsheets glowed on the laptop, lines and lines of transfers, clusters of small withdrawals that together added up to something enormous. She traced the money trail with the kind of casual brutality that made my jaw ache. What looked like petty indulgences were pattern transfers into a shell company, wire routing to accounts abroad, reimbursements that made no sense in the ledger of our life. I listened to it all with a calm that surprised me. Maybe that was the point. The less I trembled, the clearer my plan became. Rebecca, my attorney, called as I watched the numbers map themselves into damning arcs. "Freeze everything first," she said. "Temporary injunctions. Asset holds. We move while he thinks you are still crying in some car park." It felt surgical. It felt like a slow unpeeling of the lies that had been stitched into my life. We started at midnight. Marcus did the driving to a bank branch that still opened 24 hours for corporate clients. Valentina and Rebecca coordinated from conference calls. I signed paperwork with hands that didn't shake. By dawn, there were holds on credit cards, emergency transfers into accounts in my control, and a legal notice filed with an attached affidavit that included one small perfect thing: the recording from the rest stop. Andrew's voice, measured and cruel, was now a legal statement. He had taught me to stay silent. I had taught myself not to. I remember how my phone light felt scrolling through the messages on the burner. Nayan's name, a river of words and lies. They weren't just lovers. They were conspirators. Hotel bookings under assumed names. A plan to give us a break that unsafely disguised the idea of a new life he was trying to build without me. The money trail showed intent. The recordings showed cruelty. The text threads showed premeditation. It was one thing to feel betrayed. It was another to hold the proof of it in your hands and know that if you did nothing, you would have been erased by a man you had loved. I didn't want to destroy him for pleasure. I wanted him to be accountable. There's a difference that matters, even if people who have never been in that dark place don't see it. This was about unmaking his leverage, the whispered accusations he would later make about my instability, the ways his spin could drown me in doubt. I would not let him frame my defense as hysteria. I would own my voice, my documents, my story. The first confrontation was not cinematic. It was paper and glass, and the bored face of a receptionist who had no idea which war was being waged under her fluorescent lights. Rebecca and I walked into his firm before 9. I wanted him to see that I could move through his life without screaming, that the quiet, methodical woman he had underestimated could dismantle him without theatrics. He was at his desk, calm in that special way men who think they are untouchable are calm, until Rebecca handed him a copy of the injunction and the bank notice. For a heartbeat, he looked incredulous, and then something colder slid across his face. "Is this some mistake?" he asked, as if truth could be confused away. As if receipts and recordings and wire transfers were trivialities. He tried to charm, to reshuffle blame, to make his eyes look hurt, in a way that any jury would have seen through. But his hands betrayed him. They trembled over the legal papers. For the first time, the mask cracked. Word moved faster than I expected. Andrew's assistant texted a photo, his face unshaven, a weekend beard he never let me see. An email from HR pinged my inbox with the phrase, "conflict of interest," in the subject line. The whispers in the building's lobby turned into gossip that had a nasty, permanent edge. He lost a client that morning. He had been mediocre at best in his ethics. Now there was a mountain of evidence to make mediocre into criminal. I watched the man I had loved shrink in the light of other people's disapproval. And I felt beneath the satisfaction an old grief. You don't like to see the fossilized bones of someone you cared about exposed. But you do like to see them stop hurting others. The more I pushed, the more the layers unpeeled. A former business partner offered a statement off the record. An accounting firm accepted Valentina's preliminary findings and agreed to testify. Michael, Andrew's long-absent brother, the one I had found an appealing apartment, and who had given me a battered cardboard box of proof, came forward with documents from the family's old safe deposit. His testimony was raw and brutal, stories of money shifted, of favors called in, of threats glossed over by polite smiles. No one likes it when family skeletons start talking. The Whitmore facade, because there is always a facade, began to show fissures. Every time the case advanced, there was a small personal triumph, an account frozen, a client withdrawing support, a board member asking questions in a voice that had once been deferential. But there were also setbacks. Andrew called me at odd hours, voice scraping. He threatened to drag my name through the mud unless I agreed to mediation. He tried every trick in the playbook, the sob story, the apology that smelled like calculations, the sudden display of a man who claimed to be lost without his family. None of it worked because the truth was documented. I was not the woman he could portray as unhinged. At night, when the adrenaline cooled and the emails slowed to a dull thrum, I sat alone and felt the old hollow ache where trust had been. These wounds don't heal in tidy lines. They reopen in tiny acts, a misplaced plate that used to have his coffee ring, a song on the radio that used to mean something. But beneath the ache, there was a steadier sensation, agency. I could see my life fragmenting into pieces, yes, but I could also see how to put it back together on my terms. That knowledge was its own kind of shelter. The climb ahead would be long legal battles, the slow grind of discovery, the way public opinion can be cruel, even when you are justified. But when I lay my head on the hotel pillow that first night, rain pattering against the window, I felt a steadiness I hadn't recognized in years. Andrew had expected to teach me a lesson in shame. Instead, he had taught me how to stand. The storm he thought would break me had only mapped out the route to his undoing. The courtroom smelled like paper and cold metal, and the kind of impatience you can feel in the way people shift in their seats. I sat where Rebecca had told me to sit. My hands folded, the stack of exhibits at my elbow like armor. Valentina's printouts lay in neat columns. Marcus sat 2 rows back with his jaw set. Michael, who had once been an exile in a crumbling apartment, sat with a thick manila envelope of his own old receipts and faded photographs the color of secrets. The first day felt like testing the currents, soft at first, the lawyers trading formalities, the judge asking for clarity. But once the evidence began to move, once Valentina stood and traced the pattern of transfers from our joint account into the shell companies Andrew had set up to feed a life not meant for me, there was no turning back. I watched my husband squirm in a chair that didn't fit him anymore. He tried the old tricks, charm the gallery with a smile, plead exhaustion, insist that it had been a lapse, a mistake. Those words used to make something inside me soften. Not now. Not with ledgers and voice recordings and the shell of a brother who had been erased from family lore staring at him from the witness stand. Michael's testimony was the hardest to hear, but also the most freeing. He spoke without flourish, without revenge, just the steady facts of what it had been to be a son whose name the family had decided to forget. He told the court about the night his father refused to take his call, about the envelope that had been shoved back into an attic, about the way privilege covers culpability until someone lifts the rug. Hearing him say aloud what I had only suspected, hearing the man who had once lived inside their family reveal the rot, was a kind of exorcism. The judge's face did not shift into melodrama. He listened, and then asked the questions a judge asks when the scales need balancing. Andrew's lawyer tried to spin it into passion and poor judgment. He suggested I was being punitive, that I wanted to humiliate my husband in public. There was a moment, a small horrifying moment, when it felt like the whole world might accept that narrative, the wounded husband, the vindictive wife. But then Rebecca stood and recited the sequence, the burner phone texts, the transfers from accounts with consulting fees, as a pretext, the dates aligning with receipts for hotels and jewelry that never arrived at our house. She played the rest stop recording in court. Andrew's voice, so composed the night he left me, sounded small and casual and monstrous in the echo of the courtroom. He tried to laugh at first, as if laughter could erase confession. His face went white in the end. When the verdict came, it wasn't cinematic. There was no dramatic music. There was only the quiet registry of a judge stating that he found the pattern of financial deceit compelling, that custody should prioritize stability, and the evidence of deliberate abandonment could not be ignored. The judge issued injunctions, freezing certain assets, ordering a forensic audit, recommending an investigation into the transfers that had slunk away into foreign accounts. Custody was temporary at first, but made permanent after a careful review. The legal machinery moved like a slow, righteous tide. Walking out of that building felt like walking out of an old life. Reporters didn't chase me. I had zipped up a coat, kept my face calm. The people who mattered, the ones who'd seen me at my worst, were waiting. Marcus met me by the truck and handed me a thermos like he had when the rain started. Michael came up and hugged me like family does when the ground beneath you gives way and you find another hand to hold. Valentina sent a text with a string of emoji I still keep on my phone, because humor is one of the ways we stay human. The weeks after were quieter than I expected. There were practicalities, division of property statements to sign, custody schedules to set, small domestic details that undercut the notion that the worst was dramatic and done. Healing was in the minor things, picking up my son from school and hearing him tell me about a science project, laughing with Michael over a coffee that had too much sugar, painting the spare room a color that wasn't beige or safe but alive. I went back to work in a limited capacity because I needed the space between being the victim and just being me again. Work didn't define me, but it reminded me who I'd been before the erosion began. People ask me if I wanted revenge. The truth is messier. There were moments when I wanted to see Andrew humbled, to watch his smugness dissolve. But what I wanted more was to be whole. To take the threads of the life he had tried to unravel and weave them into something my children could rely on. The satisfaction I felt when the audit revealed the truth wasn't about pleasure in his ruin. It was about relief. Justice is not fireworks. It's the slow unspooling of lies until the truth is the only fabric left. There were consequences that even I hadn't anticipated. Andrew's professional reputation cracked. Clients left like birds sensing a storm. His parents, who had once ordered the room with a look, retreated. Diane vanished from the edges of their pictures. And Andrew, he was quieter now, a man learning what isolation feels like. I didn't gloat, although I won't pretend I didn't feel vindicated. More than anything, I felt sober. People we love can hurt us badly. People we respect can betray us. The work is to survive that betrayal, and to choose what you will become afterward. If there's something I want you to take from this, especially if you're watching, because your life feels like it's being rewritten without your consent, it's this: You do not have to accept the narrative others hand you. Document. Build your support. Team up with people who see evidence where others see drama. And let the law, if you can access it, be the quiet instrument that turns story into consequence. There's courage in quiet preparation. There's power in fact. If this story touched you, please like this video. Share it with someone who might need the reminder that they are never truly alone in their fight, and subscribe for more stories of truth survival and the messy, fierce work of rebuilding. Leave a comment below. Tell me how you found the courage to stand up, or what you're still afraid to say. I read every one, and sometimes your words have saved me too.